All right. Well, welcome, Steve. Thanks for joining me this morning. It's really going to help out our organ band directors just to hear you talk about improvisation because you are, in my opinion, a master of improvisation, or at
Oh,
least a good imitator of improvisation.
uh, thanks.
But again,
Yeah,
thank you for joining us. To get started, would you tell us just a little bit about who you are and where you are and what you do?
sure. So I'm Steve Treseler. I'm a saxophone player and music educator, and I live just north of Seattle, pretty near where I grew up, actually. And I started playing music just in fifth grade band. Started playing the clarinet. Had never played any music before that, and really enjoyed playing in band. And got was interested in playing in jazz band in middle school, and got pretty serious about it. And in high school, ended up deciding it's what I wanted to do as my career. Went away to the East Coast to music school and spend my time now professionally playing the saxophone, teaching. I do a lot of lessons. I do some workshops in schools and some travel for gigs and in teaching. And yeah, that's what I do. I like band so much. I just do it all the time now.
Awesome. Awesome. Us too.
Yeah.
So, we have all levels of improvisers here in Oregon. We have very beginners, and we have some kids that have some experience, and the same goes for our band directors. But what advice would you give to someone who's just learning to improvise for the first time?
Well, it's improvisation is something that's actually very natural. I mean, we do it every day, whether you're having a conversation or taking a walk or playing with a bucket of Legos. But like when we're having this conversation, we haven't planned out every single word we're going to say, or you take a walk, you don't know exactly where you're going to step or what obstacles come, or you choose what path you're going to take. So, and musically, it's one of the most common musical practices in the world. But in school and sometimes in music classes, we're trained very much to follow instructions that someone's going to tell you you're going to play these notes at this time, in this chair, in this way. And we're kind of trained to think, oh, this is how we play music. But the improvisational part, again, it can be very natural. You just have to approach things a different way. And it can be improvising a jazz solo, but that's the whole world of improvisation is much wider. You may want to improvise in other styles or more open, free improvisations, or use this process as a way to start composing your own songs or producing music on your laptop. But to get started, I would just say you just feel free to experiment. Try things out and see what happens. See what you think sounds good, see what you think doesn't, and that's all part of this process. And also having someone to jam with. I mean, that's harder to do remotely, but it's often very social music. So even if you're doing it, finding ways to play remotely using technology or standing 20 feet apart outside as your family thinks is safe, finding someone to jam with and having it be a social experience so you're not just isolated.
Having a conversation is important.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. So for other students, I mean, this improvisation is kind of a vague topic. Like if you've
Mm-hmm.
never done it before, it can be really intimidating.
Mm-hmm.
And I love your approach to this. Is like it's just like having a conversation. It's just like your day. You
Mm-hmm.
never know what's going to happen. Um, and I love what you said about that. But what about our students who know a little bit? Let's say they know
Mm-hmm.
some jazz theory, or they
Mm-hmm.
they are playing in a jazz band at school, and they know a little bit, but things just aren't quite sounding right yet.
Mm-hmm.
Any advice for them?
Yeah, well, that's a great place to be because you're growing and it means you have an idea of what right sounds like in your head. And you're kind of moving in that direction. That's your compass. And keep in mind people who you may really look up to or you think just sound amazing. They probably don't think they sound right yet either. So it's always part of this journey. Sometimes it can be a problem if you're like, I'm perfect and this sounds right and everything's great. Then maybe that's when you're not growing anymore. I mean, one of my teachers, who I talk about a lot, Jerry Bergonzi, who I studied with in Boston, he said that it would be boring if you could just achieve mastery overnight, if you could just wave a wand and okay, you've arrived already. That would be boring. That it's all about embracing the journey. So that's what it is. But it can be frustrating when you have this model of what you want it to sound like and you're not quite there. But that's the work, kind of moving in that direction. But I'd also say if you have some peers or people in your community who you think sound awesome, either other classmates who are maybe further down the path or other professionals, like hang out with them and you can learn from them even just being around them. I mean, I got into it in 6th grade. There's a kid in my class. His name was Sam, and I just heard him play a saxophone solo, and I was like, I want to do that. I was playing clarinet. How do I do that? Ended up sitting next to Sam in jazz band. He had been taking lessons and was way further along. You know, he was like untouchable. But I learned a lot seeing someone who was really good at it and that I could learn from right there. So, yeah, if it's not sounding right, that's really a time that you just keep digging in. A pitfall can be like, oh, this doesn't sound right. I'm not good at it. I give up. Maybe get get more to that later. But
Right.
yeah, leave it there for now.
Where's Sam today? Is he pro?
He was. What is Sam doing? He was in some kind of what was that? What was that band called? It had some kind of goofy name. It was kind of some psychedelic band. Yeah, he was touring all over the world and doing some stuff at a certain. Um, I don't know what Sam's doing, but he was playing professionally for a while. But I'm not sure. We ended up going to different schools, but yeah, keeping an eye on. Yeah,
Your first
uh,
competition.
yeah, but then I went to his. But I started taking lessons with Sam's teacher too, and I remember someone saying, "Oh yeah, keep doing this. You know, you'll be as good as Sam." I was like, "What? That's impossible. No one can be as good as Sam." But
Right? It's interesting how we all find our path that way.
yeah,
Sometimes it's competitive, and other times it's
yeah.
just finding the right teacher. Um,
Yeah, and
I'm
it
gonna
can be
go.
competitive. In that case, it wasn't. And sometimes some healthy competition can be good when you push each other. But in this case, it's cool to have a model. Someone's like, that person's awesome, and I want to be like that person and be as
Right.
cool. So it's not necessarily I need to beat Sam.
Right.
Actually, yeah, we were in competition. We were at solo and ensemble. Doing
Mm-hmm.
the competitive classical solos. But yeah, in high school, and then in our region, Sam ended up winning, and I got second place. But then I was an alternate, and we both ended up going to state. And he was
That's cool.
first in state, and I was second in state. But it was like, but yeah, it was all good.
Yeah. I'm gonna go off our script a little bit because we're
Okay,
improvising during this
yeah.
interview.
Wait a minute. Follow the script.
So you talked about like finding people in your community or people that you could talk to
Mm-hmm.
ask for help or just like, and I relate with this is like sitting next to someone who's better than you and just
Mm-hmm.
absorbing information
Mm-hmm.
sonically from them. Um, but how much listening to recordings was part of your growth as an improviser, or
Oh,
do you prescribe that to your students to help them?
yeah, quite a bit when I was really getting into it. I mean, when I was first in middle school, I had a 7th grade girlfriend, and we're playing, and she's like, "Hey, I'm listening to the jazz radio station. You should listen to jazz with me." And I'm like, "I'm not gonna listen to jazz. Are you kidding me?" I was playing I was listening to Nirvana. I was in the grunge scene. I was like, "I like playing in jazz band, but I'm not gonna listen to it. Are you kidding me?" Um, I actually reconnected with her. I hadn't talked to her in like I don't know 25 years or something, and retold that story. It's kind of funny. Uh, but then later on, when I was getting into it, my dad had a friend at work that was into jazz and brought home. It was a Verve jazz sampler of saxophone players on a CD. Before we had phones that did cool stuff, we all listened to music on big discs and little discs,
Hmm.
and Coltrane's Giant Steps. And then I listened to Giant Steps, and I was like, I don't understand this at all. But I heard this other one. This is Lester Young track, and I was like, oh, this is really cool. And I was listening to some uh, World War II era big band stuff with my grandparents that I got into, and then I started copying some players that I heard. But for me, it took the spark of hearing something that I was actually attracted to. I'm like, oh, this is cool. I want to figure out how to copy this on my
Hmm.
own. So at first, it didn't really take. So with my students, I have some playlists of different saxophone players, like a wide range of styles and sounds, and have them listen to it and see what they like. They're not going to like everything. So if listening kind of feels like homework, like it's like, oh, Miss Smith says I have to listen to jazz, it just feels like another thing on the pile.
Hmm.
It can be good to check out new things, but at a certain point, you have to be on the hunt for things that really resonate with you, and you hear it and go, wow, that just like your friend in the community, you hear something awesome and go, whoa, I have to figure out how to do that.
Hmm.
So it's finding those things that light you up. But if you're just yeah, so it is important, but it's that piece of it too. And there are some things that are great jazz recordings that I'm supposed to like. Man, doesn't really catch my attention that much.
Right.
But that's a huge part of it. Um, having a peer, of course, but then you listen to, yeah, some master musicians, again, to
Mm-hmm.
have that model when you say what make something doesn't quite sound right when you're improvising, but you have that in your head, like, oh, this is what right sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
But then if you ask Coltrane, it's like, oh, this is perfection, and he would still, even till the end of his, oh no, this I'm still working on this, like it wasn't
Right.
quite right for him either.
Right.
But,
I love
but yeah,
that.
for me as a sax player, yeah, Lester Young. I listened to some big bands, Glenn Miller and Count Basie big bands, and Coltrane. Those were some early influences, and some of those players and recordings I go back and listen to, and I'm like, this is still really awesome. I was just drawn to it. So
Right.
yeah,
Yeah, it's like you have to have a passion for it before you're willing to take a risk. And improvisation is can feel risky for a lot of
mm,
beginners and for me too at
yeah,
sometimes, but you got to be excited about it to be willing to take that risk.
yeah. I think so. For a lot of risks like that, yeah, when it feels a little bit scary, it can be easier to just kind of hide, and you've got to kind of buy into what the benefit is in order to take the risk
Right.
for 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 lots of things.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah,
So we're all online,
yeah.
at least for now, and I know that your studio has gone online.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that you spent a lot of time working on some things that we can do either in ensembles or duets or just for a class
Mm-hmm.
that we're teaching online to work on improv in a video meeting kind of situation. Can you tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about what you've done or successes that you've had?
Yeah, so in the before times, I would do lots of improvisation workshops. I go into schools, and I would do a lot of call and response. I play something, students play it back, and doing some group improvisation games where everyone plays together, where it's not just playing solos. We would play some things. Some of them were a little theatrical, inspired by improv theater games or some other sound textures. Find different ways of playing together. And now we're all online, and we know the issues with the delay that we all can't play together at the same time, so we can't rehearse. So, a couple things. One is finding ways to do some of those group improvisation games where you have small groups of people unmuting and playing together over Zoom, even though there is a delay. But if we're playing a game like Guess the Animal and four people are trying to sound like a chicken, if it's a little bit out of sync, it's still okay. So I have some resources I can send to anyone who's interested. There are some platforms where you can minimize the delay, which is really cool, but you have to have a really good internet connection to get those working. So it's not
Mm-hmm.
practical in school. But other things you can do if you're trading back and forth with a friend, you could do this over Zoom. I might play a phrase, Jesse responds and plays something back. You can do that back and forth and have it be a little bit out of sync. I also like doing things like bringing an audio recording of a drone, a sustained note, and you can hear each of your notes, each of a note in the scale. It has a different sound against the drone, and you can do that with a partner and play. But oftentimes, if we're doing it like this, it has to be um, sometimes a little bit out of tempo.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing I've done is pre-recorded some of the call and response videos I did. One thing is us as teachers we do over Zoom sometimes is have all of our students mute and you play something and the students play along. And from the student's perspective, it sounds in sync. But as the teacher, if you heard it, it would sound like a huge mess. So I had the idea once I was muting all my students, like, hey, I play, you play back, and I was doing some call and response with a big group, and I was thinking, well, if I can't hear the students, there's no reason this has to be live. So I made a little online course based on a lot of the in-person workshops and lessons that I did by teaching a lot of call and response. Here, I'll play this rhythm, you play it back, or you change it, and I can send a link to this blues course as a way just to get into jazz improvisation. And one way to make it not really scary. There's a couple different things. One is when you're doing something with a group of friends, maybe you're all playing together. It feels less scary when you're in a group instead of you're being put on the spot. It's like when you're like talking with a friend isn't scary, but public speaking, people get freaked out. But it's not the
Mm-hmm.
talking part; it's that everyone's looking at you. So being able to do it with a group that you trust, but also having a really specific task, if I can narrow it down. Hey, you're just going to use these two notes and play this rhythm and see what you come up with. If you feel like your job is narrow, you're like, oh, I can do this, rather than just like play anything. So a lot of my teaching and how I practice too is based around musical limitations, where I say, here's a very specific. We're going to limit our tools on purpose, and let's see what can you make. Let's just use one pitch or two pitches, and can you make something that's interesting or funny with only two notes? Okay, now we're only going to play short notes, or now we're going to take a song that you know and change something about it. So take a familiar song, make a couple changes to it, and see what happens, and have your friend do the same thing. Things like that,
Mm-hmm.
where you've got enough to work with, that you're being creative, but it's not just so overwhelming that you don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm. I'm definitely one of those people. If there's too many choices, I can't make a choice on what I want to use. So limitation is good. And that reminds me
Yeah.
of that student we had. Steve and I would teach at summer camps together, and we had
The
a
trills?
right, and that
Yeah,
was
yeah.
that was me limiting a student. I said, because this kid was just going wild, and it was just nonsense, which isn't bad. But we were at the point in the week where like the concert's coming up, and I was like, okay, buddy, like we
He
got to
was
kind
going
of
for it. We appreciated that he was just
yeah.
it was
And
just
I felt
exploding. Yeah.
bad afterwards for like limiting him, but it's a tool, and I thought, well, okay, I'll
Mhm.
try it. And then this kid just ended up playing trills because it was a two note solo, and it was just hilarious.
Oh,
Steve
that's how it
comes to
started. It
me,
was a two-note solo.
yeah. Steve comes, he's like, "What did you tell him?"
Well, yeah, and then he was going around just. And I was like, "What? So what's going on?" He said, "I'm trying to incorporate more trills into my solo." I'm like, "Okay, right on." So that'll work. And this is lots of disciplines. We'll use these kind of limitations. Like if you're in a creative writing class, there's always some kind of prompt. Like if I
Mhm.
said, "Hey Jesse, write something." Like, what am I
Right,
supposed to
exactly.
write? And I say, "Oh, can you write a haiku about the pandemic?" And suddenly you've got a syllable structure. Now you could write a bunch of them, and then you have an
Right.
idea. Or I say, "Tell me a story about uh, the first concert you remember going to," and suddenly you have something to work off of, and then you can get lots of ideas. My wife has a book about knitting projects you can do with one ball of yarn, so the person writing
Hmm.
that book narrowed down that as a project. So
Hmm.
that's one of the secrets to creativity. You narrow down the tools that you have to work with, and then sometimes you have to be more resourceful in other ways,
Hmm.
and it gives you something to focus on, so it seems less intimidating.
Right. A good place to start. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. And for teachers, like we got to think ahead and provide enough opportunities. And we'll talk more about your course because
Mm-hmm.
Steve just has a lot of ideas that I've just been stealing. So band
Go ahead.
directors out there, like steal Steve's ideas.
Yeah,
And then we'll talk about how to contact Steve if you have questions
yeah.
about the stuff. If you don't feel particularly creative with finding projects or stepping stones for your students to learn to improvise. So use Steve
Huh, thanks.
and each other, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as you go, this material can be a starting point. I want to provide something that's easy for you to use. Oh, good, here's a project we can do. But then you'll tailor it and get to be a creative partner in the process. As
Mm-hmm.
teachers and students going, oh, well, what if we did it this way? I've heard from teachers who are using this stuff. They have all kinds of cool ideas to use it in their classrooms that I hadn't thought of. But that's the spirit of the whole thing. That it's not a method you have to follow exactly
Mm-hmm.
this way, but at least gives you something to work with.
Definitely. Let's see. I want to talk about mistakes. I know I've talked to Steve about this before, but as as a young female learning to be part of
Mm-hmm.
a jazz band and learn to
Mm-hmm.
improvise and take risks, um, I found myself making a lot of mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like waiting for teachers to tell me exactly what to do instead of,
Mm-hmm.
leading my own path as a creative musician because I was afraid of doing something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So looking back now as somewhat of a professional, I'm going,
Mm-hmm.
well, that was a mistake that I was making. But I'm curious in your experience, because you've worked with all levels of
Mm-hmm.
people, kids, adults who play in symphonies.
Mm-hmm.
What mistakes do you see people making as they approach improvisation in general?
Yeah, so the mistake isn't usually the kind of mistakes that we're worried about, that you played the wrong note or that's some of the things that we're worried about. Oftentimes we're conditioned in school. It's like, yeah, you want to avoid mistakes. You want to get 10 out of 10 on the test. You don't
Mm-hmm.
want any points deducted. Please tell me exactly what I do so I don't make a mistake. And when it comes to anything more creative, it's definitely a messier process. Um, so one of the mistakes yeah, the mindset mistakes can be if you don't like your results right away. It's like, oh, that doesn't sound good. I must be bad at this. I'm going to quit. And then right there, it's over. Just thinking it's some kind of magical gift and I don't have it. We might call this a fixed mindset.
Hmm.
And oh, I hear this person who sounds great, and I've sometimes it's people who are good musicians, and then they hear their results. That's not what I want, and then they hide or they get angry, and instead kind of treating it more like the scientific method, where you're gathering data. You're trying this. Does this work? Does this not? What change can I make? Let's say you're a scientist and you had a hypothesis, and then you start gathering data, and the first couple pieces of data aren't in line with your hypothesis. It's like, I suck at being a scientist. I'm going to quit. Like, well, no, it's not because your data was wrong. You would only be a bad scientist if you gave up before you collected any data. So kind of embracing that, just feeling, being in environments where you're free to experiment and try things, and then you can see, oh, was this musically effective? And if it wasn't, instead of being like, oh, I'm no good at this, be like, well, what can I change to make this sound
Hmm.
better or more effective? Let me try something else. So it's,
Hmm.
yeah, very much like the scientific process, and in that way. And um, it's a big one. Another one for more experienced players, not necessarily a mistake, but focusing on the wrong area. Sometimes people have some experience are just ready for that. They think there's some kind of secret scale or lick or hack, or there's like something really cool they need to do because they hear people that sound awesome and want to do something cool. And oftentimes, sometimes the sound or the phrasing or oftentimes the rhythm just isn't lined up. So the main problem is the rhythm isn't grooving and it just doesn't feel good, but they're worried about some kind of secret scale they don't know about that'll magically make them sound good. So those are the some of the bigger mistakes or some of those opportunities not taken because you're not wanting to jump into it. But as far as playing a wrong note or squeaking or something, that's welcome to the club. Like
Right.
that's just part of it. But if you're worried that it's a test, I mean that can be a problem when everything needs to be so competitive. Oh, you need to play a solo, but we're going to a contest and someone's giving you a score. Then you really don't want to mess up the score, and that
Hmm.
can kind of, I mean, those experiences can be cool, but that can also further intensify those feelings if you want to get it right because you don't want to let people down by
Hmm.
making a musical mistake.
Definitely delicate balance.
Yeah.
It's so weird how we all approach things in a different way. And I
Mm-hmm.
know that when I was learning to improvise at the beginning, like I said, I was afraid of making mistakes. I wanted to do everything by the book and like
Mm-hmm.
learn the licks and learn the secret scales and
Yeah.
play the 2 5 1s. And
Sounds like you're a good student in general. You just wanted to meet expectations, but
yeah, right.
yeah,
But then later, I learned to compose.
yeah.
And that is just a messy, open thing. Like I
Mm-hmm.
remember just going for it, like all the white notes on the piano, let's go.
Mm-hmm.
And then my creativity could take off. It's just kind of hard to build in those messy creative moments
Mm-hmm.
in a band room or in a Zoom meeting. Um, but I just wanted to give
Yeah.
my 2 cents on that. Like composing is the most original kind of improvisation,
Mm-hmm.
and it's
Yeah.
slow. You don't have to
Yeah,
worry about
and there's
mistakes.
and if you want to, if you put something in that you don't like, yeah, you can get some more editing. But there's really a it's all on a continuum, improvisation
Mhm.
and composition. So a lot of composition started with someone having an idea and improvising it, and then you shape it and work with it. So for some
Mhm.
people, that's a lot more. It's related to the same. It can be the same process, but you get more time to edit. And
Mhm.
sometimes for me, that I get into super editing mode when I can make changes. Then I don't stop making changes, and yeah,
Right.
and then you can get box yourself in. Yeah, so.
Right? And back to limitations. Like, I'm
Mhm.
only going to spend this much time on this
Yeah,
edit and then I'm
a
done.
limitation.
Yeah.
I'll do that. Sometimes my limitation is I've done this before. I'm going to book a recording session before I've written any of the music, and so it's got to be done before then. So I'm spending all this money in the studio. It's definitely good. I don't want to let all these people down. Be like, sorry guys, I didn't finish the music. I'm like, no, I'm going to finish it. So I'll
I've
build
been
those in
there.
for myself. Yeah, I'm sure. More, yeah. So
It's actually kind of liberating. It's like, well,
mm-hmm,
this is as good as it is, and
mm-hmm,
take it or leave it. And I don't know. And then asking for feedback too when you're
mm-hmm.
stuck. Like we were saying, find somebody in your community that can help you. You're like, hey, I'm working on this, but what do you
Hmm.
think I should add, or what do you
Hmm.
think would make this better?
Yeah, and find someone that you trust, someone who's further along, or you really respect their opinion. Now with everything online, you can get feedback from anyone, whether or not it's going to be helpful. So you didn't put it up on YouTube and say what should come next because you've no
Right.
idea. Well-meaning people or trolls would throw whatever. So yeah, knowing who to get advice from can be big.
Right. Well, that's awesome. I do have one quick question that's off the
Yeah.
grid again.
Hmm.
We're talking about rhythm, and that is
Hmm.
something I have struggled to teach my students. It's
Hmm.
something that I've been reflecting a lot because I have a student
Hmm.
right now who is great. He has vocabulary, he listens all the time,
Hmm.
um, but just a good sense of time
Hmm.
and rhythmic tools that work and feel good. And
Hmm.
I've been reflecting on how I learned to do that. And like I said, I felt like it was an intrinsic thing because
Hmm.
I did dance.
Yeah.
I did tap for like 9 years of my childhood.
Hmm.
So like all the subdivisions and like just like
Hmm.
syncopated rhythms that we encountered just happened to come into my vocabulary.
Hmm.
How do you work with your students on rhythm and phrasing?
Yeah, that. Well, I mean, you're onto something there. I wish I had done. I'm not a graceful dancer by any means, but feeling that, especially that like embodied sense of rhythm, the pulse of our heartbeat, like that kind of rhythm that we feel and we can feel together. I was reading somewhere that that's a different process. Like it's a different brain process than
Hmm.
when we're reading rhythms off a page and trying to decode it. We spend a lot of time in class. Well, here's this rhythm. This is an eighth note. This is one and you're trying to count and do the brainy part of counting, and you can link all that together. But if it's a feel thing, it can be getting getting your full body involved, whether even your um, whether you're walking around or having students drum. I've done some units with like doing some bucket drumming. You get the Home
Hmm.
Depot buckets and some dowels, and just have everyone feel the groove together, having everyone be part of the rhythm section to some degree. That if it's, I mean, I work with a lot of horn players. Some of us just kind of float along and let the rhythm section anchor it down. So just
Right.
being really connected to the pulse and underlying subdivisions, as you said, dividing up into twos, threes, and fours,
Hmm.
and just feeling all that rhythm internally, and then getting your rhythm in on top of, like, getting your horn or your voice in on top of that internal rhythm. So it can be drumming off. Students sometimes play along, give them a ride cymbal and play quarter notes along with a recording. Or
Hmm.
a friend of mine, Saul Klein, he had a student that just had a really poor sense of pulse, like couldn't clap with a metronome, and he just had him walk in circles around the room. Like for one lesson, he was just going. He was like, "Okay, say your name with every step," and I was like, "Mike, Mike, Mike, Mike," with every step. And then the next lesson, it was for eighth notes. So Michael, Michael, with every step, because you can keep a steady rhythm in in other ways.
Hmm.
But yeah, engaging, listening to recordings, whether it's drumming or dancing, something that's more embodied,
Hmm.
and getting that on the inside rather than just focusing about what it looks like on the page.
Hmm.
Once you get it connected, like you and I have enough experience, you can see a rhythm and you can feel what it sounds like from looking at it. But
Right.
if you're just sitting there trying to herd 16th notes and stick them in the right spots, I have some students like that. They go, "Oh, well, this is on one, this is on the E of two, and then this is on the end of four," and then they don't know how to lock it to the grid. So you kind of
Hmm.
understand the counting, but you're not feeling it. But yeah, finding recordings that feel good and dancing or drumming
Hmm.
or playing your instrument along with it, because that some of it does feel
Hmm.
more of a intuitive kind of feel that's hard to
Hmm. That's why your jazz
gauge.
band teachers have you doing that weird stuff in class where you're clapping and you're tapping and you're
Yeah,
stomping and you're doing all that.
and
But that's no,
singing your parts and clapping. Yeah, all of that
exactly.
can be huge. So
Well, awesome. Anything
yeah.
else you want to give your wisdom to our
Hmm.
organ students or?
Hmm. Yeah. Well, it's this time during pandemic, it's we're all feeling pretty isolated. I mean, the more you can find ways to really feel like you're connecting with your friends and playing music, whether it's you're trading back and forth on Zoom or listening to music together on whatever um, however you video chat with your friends, or maybe someone records a part, you can send it to someone else, anyone using a digital audio workstation, make music together.
Hmm.
Or as it's safe in your area, have some summer, you know, distance backyard sessions or whatever you can do. Because when you really feel like you're part of a community, it's really what keeps all of us going.
Hmm.
Uh, and get some of your own music in there. If there's other music that you listen to that you really love, that's not part of what you typically do in band. If you're playing, wind band music and jazz stuff, some of it you may like, some might not be your cup of tea. But if you're into musicals or hip hop or weird music or whatever, there's ways to incorporate that as part of your musical voice, so you can kind of embrace that. I used to listen to a whole lot of grunge and alternative music. Then I got into jazz and I was like, okay, no pop music. I'm just going to be a jazz nerd. And then
Hmm.
like some of those sounds came back. I ended up not necessarily doing like, well, I know some people that do some grunge jazz, but there's some of the aesthetic of the music and the sounds and the timbres and the instruments that I've wanted to get back into it. So
Hmm.
it doesn't have to be that you're listening to whatever music you are in your car and then you're playing Mozart on clarinet and then back to what shows you want to listen to. So
Hmm.
finding ways to bring it all together, even though it might not be what's being asked of you right now in school.
Definitely. Well, awesome, Steve. We will have this on the YouTube for the organ band directors, their channel, and
Cool.
hopefully, schools, if they have questions for you, can contact you either through your website or email.
Yeah, my email, stevetress at gmail.com, STEVETRES at gmail.com. And then also I have a lot of my material up, my new site. It's called infiniteimprovisation.com. And from there you can download some free materials, or check out that blues course. There's a free version of that as well if you want to learn. So you get into as an intro to jazz and blues improvisation. Kind of walks you through it in a way where you'll build the skills, but it won't be confusing. You can check out the
Hmm.
intro version of that. And one of the ebooks is called Creativity Triggers for Musicians, has more open or free form prompts using some of these limitations that we're talking
Hmm.
about. But it can be outside of the world of specifically jazz vocabulary and rhythm. It might be you can draw from other sources.
That's awesome. Thank you, Steve. I'm
Yeah.
sure schools will be in touch, and I highly recommend the blues course.
Oh,
I've used it with my students, and it's
cool.
been highly successful, and it took a load off of the band director's shoulders
Oh,
to have Steve do
th-
all of it. So
thank you. Yeah, I hope to
thanks
do more
again.
courses like that. Because I thought that a lot of that needed to be the in-person experience. I can't just pre-record it. But then there are parts of it that actually were, and it's cool to hear back from that it's actually been effective in this format. And it's reaching like students all over the world in a way that I wouldn't be able to do in a live workshop.
Hmm.
Work with
Hmm.
thousands of students this semester, so it's yeah, it's cool. I've got more ideas in the works for that. So
That's
anyway,
awesome. Cool. Thanks again.